Greetings. Greetings. All right. I think I have shared with you before, one of my slants in the practical aspects of these is from a ministerial standpoint. Because if you can articulate the difference between justification and propitiation, then a lot of times the people in your pew won't be able to keep up with you. But if they walk into a Chili's and see you with a margarita on your table, your ministry is over. Are y'all with me on this? We talked about the same sort of thing. You can be brilliant in theology. If you put grandma's wedding ring in your pocket, you're dead. If you get a little handsy with another woman, you're dead. Now, one of the other things that I chatted with you about was most of your counseling sessions will be involving marriage. So it's one of the reasons why we went through that. I have made the prediction, and you can take that and $4 and get a cup of coffee, right? I've made the prediction that the next big fight that we have within the Southern Baptist Convention is not going to be about the inerrancy of Scripture or anything like that. The next big fight is going to be over alcohol. Younger pastors are all in favor of it. I think, Dr. Geisler is not Southern Baptist. If you read those appendices, Dr. Geisler is not Southern Baptist. One of the best arguments for total abstinence that I've ever read was John MacArthur. He is not Southern Baptist. And he can give you all the scriptures, and he plays with all the scriptures on it and says, guys, listen, it's still not smart. For the very reasons that I was just explaining to you. You've probably been in situations already. I can remember this from years ago, standing in line at a Kroger's. And there was a fellow in our Sunday school class. And he probably had 4 6-packs of beer in his grocery cart. And when he saw me, it was kind of like, you want to come on over? No, he was doing everything he could to stand in front of the cart so that maybe I wouldn't see what was in there. So he's doing everything he can to cover the fact. And so what do you say in a situation like that? Here was mine. Let's see if you like this. Listen, I'm not the one that you have to give an account to. It really doesn't matter, in the big scheme of things, what I think of this. This is between you and God and the people who are going to be at your party. And we'll go over some of these things as the biblical arguments unfold. You can make a good case for the fact that alcohol has benefit. A little bit. You can make a decent argument. The Apostle Paul makes a number of cases as to why this is not a good thing. And we'll go through that. So keep some of these things in mind as we go through this. I'm going to spend some time on Romans 14 after we get through some of the basics. Look, I titled this, the subtitle to this is for addiction is food, drink, drugs, tobacco, pornography, gambling, and things that end with anonymous. If you hear that next to something, then guess what? It's generally not good. So the reason why I put food first is, let's face it. Have you ever been to a Southern Baptist convention? and just kind of sat back. You guys are still a little bit young for this. 20 years from now, when you will have put on some weight, you can look back across the room and you'll see all these middle-aged fat guys. Here's my point with all this. This is not a good witness. One of the leading arguments that we have, I think, against the use of alcohol is that it's not a good witness. But if somebody can look at you and say, brother, you need to lose 50 pounds, that shows that you have a lack of discipline in another area. So I don't think we just kind of blow past this. So let's get it out of the way. Let's just, there it is. We're fat. This is obviously stereotypical because not every Christian is fat. I'm just saying there are more of us who need to lose weight than don't. And like I said, the older you get, the worse it gets. And I think that's a part of the fact, one of the reasons why we're having problem hanging on to the young adults in our church. Since the church is aging, her belt is expanding. The average church member will be extremely quick to point fingers back at us if we preach about these other addictive behaviors. If we're failing. It's the old people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones issue. Cover your weak spots. Address your weak spots. Deal with them. This is one of the things that I think, being married helps us in. There are times when, your spouse will say, you probably have lost sight of the fact that X is happening to you. You need to address this. So this is just one of the things that I think in the big argument, we need to keep in mind is we're fat. What does the Bible tell us about food? There are a lot of New Testament verses that certainly circumvent, if that's a new word for you, it goes around the Old Testament dietary laws. But there's still some basic principles that we can glean from this, I think. Luke 12:23, Jesus told the disciples, "For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing." Paul had a similar perspective about food. 1 Corinthians 6:13. Food is for the stomach, and the stomach is for food, but God will do away with both of them. Yet the body is not for immorality, but for the Lord. And the Lord is for the body. So, take that and say, okay, I'm not going to eat to live. I'm going to eat to live. I'm not going to live to eat. I was going to say, I didn't make that up. Jenny Craig and people like that say that all the time. You'll hear that about once a night, Whatever. Chuck Norris on the machines, But catch this. Every time the Bible refers to fat, it's not good. 1 Samuel 2:29. Why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling, and honor your sons above me, and making yourself fat with the choices? Job 15:27. For he has covered his face with his fat, and made his thighs heavy with flesh. On down to 21:24. His sides are filled out with fat, and the marrow of his bones is moist. Put that on your resume. Psalm 119:70. Their heart is covered with fat, but I delight in your law. Now, those of you might need to remember, this is highlighted, right? Highlighted ones become important. Proverbs 13:4. The soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the soul of the diligent is made fat. So, fat is not spoken of well in Scripture, but neither is laziness. Now, This is obviously not the problem here. You guys are taking a lot of hours. You're doing a lot of work. You've got ministry. You've got families, some of you. You're juggling a lot of different responsibilities. Fat is generally not the problem for the seminarian. Fat is generally going to happen to you once you get out of here and you start making a decent paycheck. Proverbs 6, 9 through 11. How long will you lie down, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your need like an armed man. When you graduate, you'll get a job, you're working someplace, you're on call 24/7 if you're the senior pastor. Some of you who are junior high and high school pastors haven't experienced that yet. Senior pastor gets a lot of calls that you don't know anything about. You may not have to juggle as many issues as you do now, but I'm telling you, time management is never going to go away. It's amazing to me how stuff will just fill up a calendar. You're so accustomed to, I go to classes on these days, and I got this, and then all of a sudden, I just have one job now. It's amazing how fast that calendar fills up. It's just different things. You've got funerals, you've got weddings, you've got counseling, you've got all kinds of other things that fill up. You've heard me say this before, but the average church member thinks that all you do is drink coffee and go to Sunday school all the time. That's what ministers do. And what you're going to have issues with is this last point, is finding the balance. Never neglect your family. Never neglect your health. This is what I'm telling you. Get in habits now. In your 20s, exercise is not that big of a deal. And I'm just telling you, the day you turn 30, stuff will just start messing up. Some of you have already been there. I heard that. I see that hand. Thank you. Let's talk about drugs, and we'll come back and do some more things. But I want you to make sure that you're thinking drugs. That's not a problem. That's like a street problem. That's not a church problem. Can I tell you something? I've had numerous discussions with Christians about prescription drugs. To me, one of the saddest things in the world. Think about this. A Christian on antidepressants. Now, I am fully aware of the fact that there are times when people's chemicals get out of balance, and the doctors may have to prescribe something to make an adjustment. It's not what I'm talking about. In a lot of situations, people get into pity parties because the kids are grown. The husband is not just extremely romantic anymore because you've been married 20-something years, and it's da-da-da-da-da. I really thought that by now we would have had X amount of dollars in the retirement fund, and we don't, so it's my husband's fault. So from there, you go and you get these prescriptions. And there's a lot of doctors who are really willing to write these prescriptions. Why? They got kids to feed. They make money every time you go to Walgreens. You want to get plugged into something like that, then that's up to you. But I'm just telling you, a Christian on antidepressants for no physical reason is an oxymoron. It should not be. Okay, just for a second, let's chat about this. Why? Talk to me. Why am I taking a stance against Christians and antidepressants? Now, that's the tip of the iceberg. There's a bunch of other drugs. This is just the flavor of the day. Why are these two incompatible? Don't make me point.
Christians should be the most joyous people.
Absolutely.
Because I had a professor in undergraduate for psychology, and he says that Christians, the thing he used to get people out of the bed and everything when they were depressed and stuff like that was exercising, getting their endorphins going, and praising God. Those two things every time got them off any medication.
Why is that alien to us? Why would we opt for drugs instead of doing some exercise and having a time of worship? Whatever you want to call it, quiet time, study time, whatever you want to call it. Why are we not walking with the Lord instead of walking into the doctor's office? Don't think this is not a problem, guys. You may not have deacons who are loading up on marijuana or LSD or some of those kinds of recreational things. Now, if they ever make it legal here, we got problems. These guys in Colorado and California and places like that, I don't know how they... I mean, those preachers are probably preaching to congregations that are half asleep. There are 25 million Americans who use marijuana. Now, these numbers are a few years old. I would imagine, when you factor in the fact that it's now legal in a couple of different states, I imagine that number's gone up. But it is not the number one drug problem, as Dr. Geisler pointed out in his book. But it's the number one illicit problem. And like we were saying a minute ago, unfortunately, that the older we get, these things are going to become worse. And this is going to make some of these things even more problematic as we go along. So think about Galatians 5:22. Anybody memorize that? The fruit of the Spirit is what? There's 9 of them. Peace, joy, love, gentleness, kindness, da-da-da. How do you square an antidepressant with the fruit of the Spirit? You can't do it. Now, those of you who are in junior high and high school ministry, look at this last little bullet. This is a story. Don't be afraid to try scary things with your kids. Now, this was like 1972, something like that. For Sunday school one morning, they showed a guy getting his stomach pumped. I don't know where they got this film. I have no idea. But those of you who are familiar with garden hoses, and I'm sure it's changed, but I'm telling you, they put what had to have been a 50-foot garden hose down this guy's throat. And I mean, they just kept pushing and kept pushing and kept pushing and pushing. And I'm telling you, I broke out in a cold sweat. I'd never done any hard drugs, but this sure scared the stew out of me. If this is what LSD, back in the 70s, that was the thing that all parents were afraid of. So if you can get something like this, don't get one from the 70s, okay? But if you can find something like that will scare your kids, out of doing hard drugs, don't be afraid of it. And I can't remember, as I'm sitting here, I can't remember which old guy, old great pastor he was not, he would use the term scare people out of hell and then would intentionally kind of reverse it to make a point. Don't be afraid to scare kids for doing stupid stuff. So let's look at nicotine just for a second. When I was a kid growing up, I mean, the deacons would sort of gather in this one particular corner outside to smoke. Now, a lot of things have changed since then. They were just discovering that it was harmful. The guys came back from World War II, and it was one of the ways they got through World War II. And so when the war was over, or Korea, and then when they came back, and it was kind of like, what's wrong with this? Well, then 15 years later, the Surgeon General came out with this thing that said, this can be harmful to your health. Well, in my family, the women were smart enough to quit smoking. The men couldn't do it. They were addicted and didn't want to. And you read that little story down there. I'm telling you, my dad and my mother's brother, both World War II veterans, and they were like, I'd rather die. Well, unfortunately, they were both gone within the next year. Let's talk a little bit about sexual issues. We've gone through a lot of this already. There are a lot of websites available today that talk about the testimonies of Christians, even ministers, who started off as just sort of like sticking their toe in the water with pornography. And you could kind of, as an ethics professor, this kind of stuff falls in obviously into my area. You have to be real careful with this. Listen, people say, well, have you seen 50 Shades of Grey? And my answer is no. And they say, well, you're an ethics professor. Well, just because I oppose LSD doesn't mean that I've had to do some of it just so I can tell you what the experience was like. I mean, again, people think that ethics professors just do all kinds of stupid stuff like this just so we can know what it is. It's dumb. But a lot of guys, a lot of ministers, some of you may have friends, that just out of curiosity thought, let me check into this. And then before you know it, they're hooked. It can ruin your career and it can ruin your marriage. And as we'll talk about in the next few slides, pornography is as addictive, if not more addictive, than any of these drugs. So, go back to whatever it was, week 2 or whatever, when we were talking about heterosexual ethics, right? You remember the box? I said, draw a box. Man, woman. All of your sexual pleasures, or not even pleasures, everything sexual fits in that box. Everything. Now, I've edited it, but I had this thing that I used to go into, and with younger people, like if I were doing this at the college instead of the seminary, one of the things that we talk about is, when I was a kid, these sexually transmitted diseases, you could go down to the local health clinic and get a shot for, and you'd be cleaned up. Sexually transmitted diseases today kill you. And I'm not just talking about AIDS, which is the one that everybody knows about. There are STDs now that are a mile long. And the medical guys are bloody scratching their heads They don't know how to beat it. And probably within the junior high and high school age, you're going to run into somebody who's going to contract something like this and just going to have to live with it for the rest of their lives, which is not going to be as long as it should have been. So this is just another thing. And again, would it sound kind of weird to discuss stuff like that in a junior high and high school group? Is it as much fun as preaching from the Bible? No. But I'm telling you, they're going to get something out of this. Because they don't know. These are not just things that make your nose run anymore. These are things that kill you. I think we may have talked about this during the heterosexual part. One of the things that you'll get in counseling is people who are having issues with pornography say that, and it's generally the husband who sort of begins the dialogue. But he says, we're having problems in bed, so I bought some pornography so that my wife can learn some things. And if you've ever been on an airplane and you pick up the magazine, there are ads in there, with this absolutely beautiful woman who's got a white coat on. She's supposed to be some kind of doctor, and she's going to help you with these things. And if you order her tapes and send $100 to then all your problems will go away. There's no telling how many people fall for that hook. And then after it almost ruins their marriage, what? They're in your office. How do I get out of this? Listen, let me tell you, some of these people are well-meaning, good-intending people who've just stepped in a trap. But what they're forgetting is when you drag pornography into your bedroom, would they invite another couple in to have sex right in front of them? No. But they're going to show pictures of it. And somehow they're supposed to benefit from this. There are a couple of things that pop into mind, and I don't know if Dr. Geisler goes into this much or not, but think about this. First off, the people who make pornography are actors. Real life sex is not like that. They want you to think it is. They're selling it to you. Number two, the people who are chosen to be in this movie, if you want to use that term, are physically superior people. They're not going back several slides. They're not people who generally struggle with weight issues. So what's going to happen? You bring those people into your bedroom, and then all of a sudden you look over at your wife who may have gained some weight after her third child, and you're just kind of going, ew. So what happens is you end up with some comparisons that are extremely unfair. And somehow she's going to have to get out of that this is going to benefit the marriage. So, never counsel for this. In fact, demand they get rid of it. This is a trap like no other. A woman needs communication. A woman does not need pictures. Are y'all with me on that? Those of you who have been married, you understand that a woman needs words. She doesn't need photographs. So look at that last bullet. Don't even play with this. It's just like the proverbial moth. You start playing with this thing, and before you know it, you're gone. Pornography is the new narcotic. We talked about this. Neurological research has revealed that the effect of internet pornography on the human brain is just as potent as addictive chemical substances such as cocaine and heroin. Did y'all get that? You thought cocaine was about as bad as it got. Internet pornography is as bad or not or worse. Look at this. 1.9 million cocaine users, 2 million heroin users, 40 million pornography users. Don't think this is not a problem. Here's why it can be worse. Cocaine is considered a stimulant that increases dopamine levels in the brain. Any of you remember the Robin Williams movie, Awakenings? These people had gone into coma, and then the doctor was prescribing L-dopamine, and it was doing some stuff in their brain. They were coming out of these comas. It's an artificial creation of something that works naturally. It's the primary neurotransmitter that most addictive substances release, and it causes a high and a subsequent craving for a repetition of the high. That's the hook. Rather than the feeling of satisfaction by way of endorphins. Heroin is an opiate, which has a relaxing effect. Both drugs trigger chemical tolerance, which requires higher quantities of the drug to be used each time to achieve the same intensity of effect. You've got to have a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. Look at this. Pornography, by arousing dopamine, is a polydrug. Now, let me just kind of give you a warning. I didn't highlight that in the color. This is a really good final exam question. It's a polydrug that triggers both types of addictive brain chemicals in one punch. See there? You get two with one. We're going to get a high, and we're going to get down at the same time. Wow, the brain loves that. This is Morgan Bennett. Think of the brain as a forest where trails are worn down by hikers who walk along the same path over and over again. The exposure to pornographic images creates similar neural pathways that, over time, become more and more well-paved as they are repeatedly traveled with each exposure to pornography. Those neurological pathways eventually become the trail in the brain's forest by which sexual interactions are routed. Thus, a porn user has unknowingly created a neurological circuit that makes his or her default perspective toward sexual matters ruled by the norms and expectations of pornography. And it gets worse. Another aspect of porn addiction that surpasses the addictive and harmful characteristics of chemical substance is its permanence. Once those images get in your brain, they don't go away. Substances can be metabolized out of the body, but the pornographic images are stored in the brain's memory. Brain research confirms the critical fact that pornography is a drug delivery system that has a distinct and powerful effect upon the human brain and nervous system. John Piper writes, "Physical reality affects the heart, and the heart affects physical reality. Therefore, this horrific news from brain research about the enslaving power of pornography is not the last word. God has the last word. The Holy Spirit has the greatest power. We are not mere victims of our eyes and our brains." And then there's a spot where you can go and hear a little bit more about what John Piper has to say about this. But this gets back to what we were talking about a second ago. This is why the two don't mix, whether it's pornography, whether it's antidepressants, whatever it is for a Christian who is supposed to be walking with the Lord. Getting involved in these kinds of things says what? The Lord is not meeting my needs. Now, I think most everybody in this room will tell you the Lord meets your needs. The reason why the Lord doesn't meet my needs is because what? I don't want Him to. Maybe my needs have gotten a little weird for whatever reason. Here's what Dr. Moeller has to say about this. He's sort of reviewing this book. It's not new anymore. William Struthers, Wired for Intimacy. How pornography hijacks the male brain. Now let me just stop there while I'm thinking about it. We'll come back to this. Before the internet, the number of male to female, the ratio male to female users of pornography was something like 86% male, 14% female. After the internet, it's more like 66-33. Now, so you can say, oh, well, the men are still twice as involved in pornography as women are. That's one way of looking at it. Here's the other way of looking at it. More than twice as many women are involved in pornography as there used to be. It used to be you'd have to go up to a store and pay for a magazine. Now, just click on something. Nobody knows about it. Hey, listen. Don't ever get fooled into thinking nobody will ever know about this. Listen, everything that you've ever rented from Netflix, somebody knows about it. And especially as a minister, when your life is now under a microscope, somebody who knows what he's doing can dig into this kind of stuff and say, dude's got a pornography problem. And you're kind of stunned. Well, 5 years ago, you rented Blip, Blip, and Blip. Well, I forgot about that. I'm just telling you. I shared the story about a friend of mine who was arrested for soliciting minors. And he was stupid enough to do it on the church's computer. You can't hide anything anymore. Listen, as ministers, you shouldn't be worried about hiding anything. Your issue is with God. Your issue is, it's just like my deal with the guy who was buying beer. It's not me you have to explain this to. Dr. Moeller says, in a fallen world, pornography becomes more than a distraction and a distortion of God's intention for human sexuality. And then here's a little bit of a cut from that book. Viewing pornography is not an emotionally or physiologically neutral experience. It is fundamentally different from looking at black and white photos of Lincoln Memorial or taking in a color map of the Canadian provinces. Men are reflexively drawn to the content of pornographic material. As such, porn has wide-reaching effects to energize a man toward intimacy. It is not a neutral stimulus. It draws us in. Porn is vicarious. Is that a new word for some of you? It kind of like is substitutionary and voyeuristic at its core. But it is also something more. Porn is a, catch this, whispered promise. It promises more sex, better sex, endless sex, sex on demand, more intense orgasms, experience of transcendence. Then Moeller concludes, pornography is a sin that robs God of His glory in the gift of sex and sexuality. We have long known that sin takes hostages. We now know another dimension of how this particular sin hijacks the male brain. Okay, let's go on. Obviously, the first time I did this, I was thinking, we could almost have class periods on each one of these. We obviously don't have time for that. Gambling. Now, I thought Dr. Geisler did a good job with this. Just because the word gambling doesn't appear in the Bible doesn't mean it's not a sin. Those of you who have studied logical fallacies, this is an argument from silence. It doesn't work. It's amazing how many Christians have no problem with gambling, especially if it's legal. Pardon the pun, but you can bet that several people who will not give a dime to the church will have enough money to buy lottery tickets or even take trips to Las Vegas. Why? It's legal. It's legal. Can't be nothing wrong with it. See the spiritual battle that's going on here. Paul says, 2 Corinthians 6:14, do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership have righteousness and lawlessness, or what fellowship has light with darkness? Just keep that part of it in your brain. What fellowship is there with light and darkness? And again, just like we were talking about with pornography, don't fly close to that flame. Listen, you're going to get to the point where you're going to have a nice salary coming in and money won't be so absolutely tight. You don't need to know where every nickel goes. You've got people in your church who make a lot of money. And for them to go and buy $100 worth of lottery tickets is nothing. It's getting them hooked in the wrong area. It's not the legalistic aspect of it. It's the path. When you go to Vegas, prostitution is legal, gambling is legal, pornography is everywhere, alcohol flows like water. I frankly do not understand why Christians are attracted to a place that refers to itself as Sin City. I don't get that. We don't belong in environments like that. This is light and darkness having fellowship. But like pornography, overeating, smoking, and all these other addictions, gambling usually starts off, it doesn't begin with the high stakes tables. It usually starts off with a lottery ticket or something like that. People see this as Christian liberty punched on it. So this is where we're going. I may not have time to finish this, but one of the things that I want you to think about from that point on is Christian liberty. Paul says that everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. So, all right, let's go on. We're going to run out of time. Dr. Geisler, I think, did a good job with this one too. Gambling's greed. Romans 1:28 and following. You're familiar with this. We've read this before, so I'm going to skip through it. But you see the word greed a couple of times when Paul puts these lists together like this. Especially in Romans 1, we have a tendency to just think this is all about homosexuality. Look at that. Wickedness, unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy. Whoa. Envy, murder, strife. Okay. We're doing pretty good. Oh, deceit, malice, uh-oh, gossips. Wow, isn't that brilliant? Put gossips and murder in the same sentence. And then not only do they do this, it's just kind of like that situation in 1 Corinthians, right? They brag about it. Give hearty approval to those who do that. So, greed is idolatry, and idolatry is the love of money, and the love of money is evil. See that connection? Ephesians 5:3, but immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you as is proper among saints. Listen, this stops you where you are. If you've got somebody in your church that is hooked on A, the lottery, B, Las Vegas, this is greed. And you see this connection here. These dots connect real easily. 2 Peter 2:2 and 3. Many will follow their false prophets' sensuality. And because of them, the way of the truth will be maligned. And in their greed, they will exploit you with false words. Their judgment from long ago is not idle. Their destruction is not asleep. We talked about this. This just shows that there are some areas where people have discipline and there are some areas where we don't. Again, I got some bad stories to tell you. Here's another one. I've got a friend. His dad was an evangelist. His brother's a pastor. Went on a ski trip to Nevada with some friends, and all these guys were softball teammates of mine. This is 25 years ago. Some of these men threw a few dollars away and quit. This one particular friend of mine maxed out 3 credit cards. And if this isn't bad enough, he had to go home and break that news to his wife who was dying of cancer. I used to use a book that John MacArthur wrote, and he's got some staff guys who go into that last bullet point in a lot more detail. The only thing that video games waste that you might buy for your house or comes free on the computer or whatever, they waste your time. You can get addicted to playing solitaire, right? Harmless, right? Wastes a lot of time that you guys don't have. I had a friend, I worked a large business deal for this guy, and he was, to show me his gratitude, he sent my wife and me to Las Vegas. So, we took our golf clubs and we went out there and we played golf. Got on the tee box with this one guy who lived there. We said, just kind of conversation, what do you do here? He says, well, I avoid that place. I said, good for you. He said, you see those big buildings out there? He said, they don't build them if you win. You ever wondered why there's so many of these monstrous hotels and buildings? Because you lose. Here are some biblical references to self-control. We just talked about Galatians 5:22. Self-control is one of the fruit of the Spirit that gets lost. Look at this one, 2 Timothy 3:2. For men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revilers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control. Brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. Within the church, misery, as they say, loves company. If you want to get involved in some drinking / pornography / gambling, whatever, it's almost comforting to get another couple to go with you to do it. Why? Because you're not the only sucker around. That's some bad logic. Now, we're obviously not going to have time to get into this, but we may start off on Thursday, finishing. I do this thing about, Paul talks in Romans 14 about the weak and the strong. And there's a lot of times that we just totally misinterpret that. So what I'll probably do on Thursday when we have a little bit more time is I'll probably just start off with that, and then we'll finish up with doing the thing on the false religions. The ethics on false religions is really kind of cool. I don't know about you. I mean, I graduated with my MDiv, and if somebody had asked me much of anything about Hinduism, Buddhism, I got nothing. Closest I came to it was church history. Dr. Paul Greitz just decided to talk about it a little bit one day. So what I did is I said, okay, within each one of these religions, there is an ethical system. So I put all that together. So Thursday, let's go through that. Let me see if there's anything left before we get into the week. This is important, okay? And then we'll save this for next week. That's when I start in the weak and the strong, and I've got about 20 different slides on that. So we'll come back to that on Thursday. But let's look at this for a second. Look at these references to renewing the mind. Because let's face it, everything that we have just talked about is centered between our ears, right? It may involve other parts of our bodies, but it's all brain related. And getting our thoughts under control, and, getting focused on Him is the easiest way to do this. Romans 7:22. For I joyfully concur with the law of God in the inner man, but I see a different law. You're familiar with the Romans 7 passage? Paul's talking about, I don't do what I'm supposed to do, and I do what he just says absolutely great stuff. But I see a different law in the members of my body waging war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin which is in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will set me free from the body of this death? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then, on the one hand, I myself with my mind am serving the law of God, but on the other with my flesh, the law of sin. And then slide on down a little bit. Romans 12, 1 and 2. Some of you probably have this memorized. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the what? Renewing of your mind. So that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. I hope you've picked up on enough of the stuff that we've read from Dr. Piercy. She followed Total Truth up with a book called Saving Leonardo, talking about how Christians don't know anything about art and culture and stuff like that because we don't think. And I hope you understand. You're going to have people in your church that will say, well, I don't need to think. I just believe. That's bad stuff. Because if you don't think, well, it's all throughout that. But the mind needs to be renewed. Lobotomy. The mind needs to be renewed on a regular basis. And folks, listen, this is the powerful part about walking, what we were talking about a minute ago, walking with the Spirit. If you're walking with the Spirit, then when you stumble, when you get involved in some of these things, what happens? The Spirit convicts you. And catch yourself with this. If you're not convicted of your sin, then what? What's the logical inverse of this? You're not walking with the Lord. If you're not convicted of your sin, you're not walking with the Lord. So, that's all. God willing, I'll see you guys on Thursday. I would recommend, if you have a little time, read through Romans 14. Our deal will go a little bit quicker if you do that.